Hi there, it's Dean from Electronisounds. Stick around, we're going to talk about sidechain compression inside of Beatmaker 3. I've loaded a kick drum onto bank A, and I've got a bass line going on bank B. Now these frequencies are pretty similar, and what we want is we want our kick drum to punch through every time it hits. We don't really want it to be muddy when the kick drum hits because it's maybe conflicting with the frequencies in the bass line. So what we'll do is we'll use a sidechain compressor, and the sidechain compressor is going to duck the level of the bass line for us every time the kick drum hits. This is going to allow the kick drum to punch through in the mix. Let me show you how to set this up. On the bass channel, we're going to add an effect and we're going to choose the dynamics processor. We're going to choose a sidechain input of the kick drum, and we'll choose the specific pad that's housing that sample. This is so if you've got maybe all 16 pads playing a beat, but you only want everything to sidechain against the kick drum, you would be able to select it among the other pads here if you had more sounds in this bank. We'll select the kick loop. Now this will already be sidechaining to the kick drum, but what we want to do is pull the attack down from 10 milliseconds to all the way at the bottom to 1 millisecond, because we want this to happen at the exact time that the kick drum hits. We don't want it to be 10 milliseconds after the kick drum hits. We want this bass line to duck at the exact time that that kick drum hits, so we'll make sure to pull that attack all the way down. I like to set the ratio to 4:1, and the release you can adjust to taste. You'll experiment with this depending on your track and getting it to sound the way that you'd like it to sound. Let me show you what this does. You'll see this little graphic here starting to move, and if we choose GR for gain reduction, you'll see that it's pushing down on the volume of the bass every time the kick drum hits. Now, we can make this more extreme for that EDM pumping style by pulling the threshold effect down. The further we pull this down, the more we are enhancing the pump effect. So that now, when the kick hits, it is pushing the volume down on this bass line very, very extreme. We typically wouldn't want it that extreme for a bass line, but we would want to duck it out of the way of the kick drum a little bit. This is where personal preference comes in. I think that sounds pretty good right there. The kick drum is punching through a little bit more than it was before, but the bass line is still cutting through as well. You get the best of both worlds using sidechain compression. Now, how much or how little you use sidechain compression in your tracks and mixes, that's really up to you. It's kind of a personal preference. I've added a hatch track here, and I think it might use a little sidechain compression as well. So what we'll do is we'll add an effect, we'll add the dynamics processor, and for the sidechain input, we're going to choose the kick drum again, and we'll get these hats to duck just a little tiny bit every time the kick drum hits. So we'll choose this here, and it is the kick channel that we'd like to sidechain against, so we'll select the pad. We'd like to select the kick loop pad. Now it's going to sidechain every time the kick drum hits. And let's start it out with just a threshold of 6. We're going to pull the attack all the way down. I'll press play, and I'll pull this threshold down until we can really hear the pumping effect start to happen. Okay, so it's really, really ducking the volume every time the kick drum hits. This would be like extreme sidechain compression. We don't need that extreme sidechain compression, so we'll pull this up quite a bit. That's pretty good right there. It's definitely ducking when the kick drum hits. The kick drum sounds good, but yet you can still hear the hi-hats in the mix, and you can still hear the bass line in the mix. So we've got 2 channels being sidechained to the kick drum now. I've added a pad sound to the mix now, and what we'll do is we'll use Sidechain Compression to get some pretty serious EDM style pumping on that. This is the pad channel, and we will add an effect. We'll use the Dynamics processor, and this time we'd like to get this at the very top of the effects chain because I have some effects in this chain already. So we're going to move up, and we'll do that again. Move up until we get this to the top of the list. Move up, and that should do it. Fantastic. We're going to choose the kick. We're going to sidechain this against the kick drum. We're going to select the pad. Again, if you had a full drum kit, there would be other sounds here, but you would choose your kick drum. And we'll leave everything the same except for we'll bring that attack all the way down so that the very millisecond that the kick drum hits, it will duck the volume on this pad channel. And we'll make some adjusting here until you start to hear that EDM style pumping come in. Check this out. Oh, let's change the ratio first. This is just sort of my personal preference, but I really do prefer the 4:1 for doing this. It works with the 2:1 compression ratio also. This is a personal preference. Let's see if we can get some serious pumping on this pad. And there we have it. This is Sidechain Compression. It sounds pretty familiar, I bet. The more we pull this down, the more we're pulling the volume down on our pad channel every time that kick drum hits. So this is really up to you, how much you'd like to pull this down and how much of that pumping effect you'd like to hear in the mix. A lot of times you might see somebody automate the threshold of this in certain sections of the song. I think it's also important to note that once you've got this routing set up inside of Beatmaker 3, that the sidechain is going to stick to whatever pattern you program into the kick drum. Here, I've changed it up from a 4 on the floor to a different kind of rhythm, and you'll hear that the sidechain is still ducking every time this note hits. It's not necessarily a rhythmic to the 4/4, it's a rhythmic to these notes that you put in. See how we're no longer doing that 4 on the floor pattern, but rather it's following these. That's the point of sidechain compression. Every time this kick hits in the song, once you set it up, it's going to duck those volumes for you, no matter what rhythms you program with this kick drum throughout your track. Now keep in mind, you don't have to sidechain to the kick drum. That could have been a snare drum that we sidechained to as well. All you have to do is repeat the exact same process, and instead of choosing the kick drum pad, choose whichever pad you would like to trigger the sidechain. So if you want the kick drum to trigger a sidechain as well as a snare drum to trigger a sidechain, just add a second compressor and choose the sidechain channel of the snare drum with the second compressor. I hope this helps you understand sidechain compression inside of Beatmaker 3 a little better. Be sure and subscribe for more Beatmaker 3 shenanigans. Thanks for watching.